Hmm. Hello, Gary, and good to see you.
Hi, Andy. How you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm really well, thank you, and it's great to have this chance to talk to you about a subject that's passionate, very close to both of our hearts in research communication.
Indeed, yeah. Thanks so much for coming along today, Andy, for this live session, and also for facilitating the event that we have next month for the Scottish Graduate School for Arts and Humanities. We're delighted to have you involved.
And I'm looking forward to it immensely, and not least because Edinburgh is such a important destination in terms of the history of communicating research. The first science festival in Edinburgh, a festival city. I mean, what better context than to have this event for the first time taking place there?
Yeah, absolutely. It is a festival city. It's Edinburgh and Scotland in general, I think, is a great place for the study of arts and humanities. Edinburgh is rich with culture. And yeah, we're delighted to have you along to speak to PhD students and doctoral students who are working in the creative economies. So thanks for coming along today and for coming along next week to speak to the doctoral students about how they can communicate their research using digital content creation methods, an area which I know that you're a little bit of an expert in.
Well, I'm very passionate about it. I remember one of the stories I tell people is that when I was a PhD student, I remember a professor telling me that an academic article is read by an average of 6 people. Now, of course, nobody wants to write an average academic article, but nevertheless, it just sort of at that point really got me thinking about what our impact is as researchers. And whilst we often do kind of break new ground in terms of how we think about the world or understand it, we don't always do the best job of actually telling people about what we do. And actually, often when people do get to a point where they are publishing their research, doing interviews about what they found, it can often be really challenging. So back when I was a PhD student, we didn't have anything like this. I mean, of course, PhDs back then weren't doing a great deal in communication generally, but there also wasn't the multitude of platforms that exist now for researchers to have that opportunity to share what they're doing. It feels like so much has changed in 20 years. I mean, for me, particularly around the possibility of being able to own your own channels of communication. And that allows this kind of direct conversation with the public, which gives you both the opportunity, but also the challenge of figuring all that out.
Fantastic. And I would just like to say to the people watching this session live that Andy was my PhD supervisor. And one of the things that I learned during my PhD was, the research itself is important, but it's equally important to communicate that research to various audiences. And that's something which I'm very passionate about. And I think, I sort of developed that passion under Andy's supervision. And you really nurtured, that passion for communication of research to wider audiences. I will say I've got a paper which is due for a special issue this week. So I'll hopefully, more than 6 or 7 people will read that paper. But I will come along to the session in April and further develop my skills in content creation so that I can share those findings much more widely with the communities that I do want to reach through my action research.
And I think that's a really great example because, I mean, you're really the embodiment of the kind of historical trajectory of research communication. We are not just doing it in order to reach, engage, involve the public or each other more widely. We're also developed quite complex methodologies for how to do that well. And what we've seen over the last sort of 30 years is a growing sophistication of the discipline, but also really the establishment of research communication, often sort of described as science communication in the literature. And I think your work has been fantastic in terms of thinking about different formats for engaging the public by creating theatrical events, festivals, these sorts of things. Because I guess for me, it's partly about, where do you actually reach people, and where do you have an opportunity to engage people on research at all? And the window's quite small, really, when you think about it on a day-to-day level. When do you have that chance? So you have to be quite creative with those opportunities, I think.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the term there, science communication. Now, I know that many people listening to this video will be familiar with the term science communication, but it might not be a term which doctoral students in the arts and humanities are particularly used to hearing. Perhaps, Andy, you can tell us a little bit about, how we communicate research in the arts and humanities and how that blends with science communication, how research is done in the science, technology, engineering, and maths, the so-called STEM sectors.
Well, it's really interesting because I think what we've seen over the last 5 years alone is a growing recognition that we've separated out the science and the arts in a really artificial way. I mean, it wasn't always the way. These sets of disciplines and approaches to inquiry were historically much closer together. So I think the sort of rise of the Science Festival is a product of the sort of STEM era, where there was a desire to try to build greater capabilities and, of course, skills within these distinct areas. And I think arts and humanities didn't go through that journey, really. But what we've seen over the last 5 years is a real expansion of what we think of as STEM. I think partly because we understand more now that if you do want to engage people on STEM subjects, then you need to bring in much more creative approaches to it. Gone are the kind of big lectures as the way to explain things, and we see much more really intimate sort of ways of trying to talk and have dialogue with people. So I think that's led to a natural, not just closer relationship between STEM and non-STEM subjects, but I think a growing appreciation for the common ground between these areas, which is sparking a whole range of new events. And I think also breaking down of the walls between the disciplines too. So we now have a much more, I mean, a great example is FameLab, which is the big talent competition that's run by Cheltenham Science Festival, which has become increasingly expansive in how it thinks about and embraces a whole range of disciplines that aren't from the traditional science festival disciplines. And I think that transformation is just wonderful for what we're doing in universities, what we're doing in research, because the deeper you get into subjects, the more you realize that, in fact, this separation between disciplines is a kind of artifice, really, and we need to think about the crossovers between disciplines. And I think we've also seen over the last few years a growing synergy between creative and science areas. So hopefully we're in better shape to do that. But of course, there are distinct challenges. And I think partly why we have this event taking place in April this year with the grad school for arts and humanities, to sort of foreground the need for communication skills to be developed from the arts and humanities perspectives. There are some great festivals around where people do go and give talks. And of course, writers produce books and all sorts of things that become part of that popular public domain. But trying to bring more people from the arts and humanities into this world, is still a major task.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of something that we're doing this year at the Cheltenham Science Festival. So for those of you watching this video live, I'm a practitioner academic. So I do my research and teaching, but quite a lot of my work is based outside of the university. And one of the roles which I have at the moment is curator, one of the curators at the Cheltenham Science Festival team. One of the things that I'm doing there is curating a zone within the festival called the Arcade. And this is all about, cybersecurity and how we can make cybersecurity more diverse and more accessible to people from different backgrounds, people with protected characteristics. We want to sort of challenge the stereotype of what it means to work in cyber. And one of the things that we're doing is that we're working really closely with arts and humanities. So we're working, with the local paint festival to look at how we can engage art and show that cyber is part of culture. And we're working with a number of other sort of arts organizations to bring them in to show that kind of human side of cyber, and to show that, because cyber is in itself, one of the STEM industries, that, being a scientist isn't a requirement to work and to thrive in that industry. And also, we're also working with the scientists and all of our partners to help them develop fun and engaging activities and fun and engaging ways to create content which is innovative and engaging and inspiring for the people to come along to the festival. So on one hand, we're working with scientists to help them use language which is accessible and informative and make their activities fun and playful. And on the other hand, we're working with artists to help them take a step into the science world and to work really collaboratively with the scientists in order to share their knowledge and their research.
Oh, that's such an important insight. I'm thinking ahead towards our event next month, which this was initially pitched as a kind of teaser for people to then sign up for it, but we're already sold out for the event for next month. So in the end, I think it's going to be a call for people to connect with each other afterwards, and we'll share the link to do that at the end of this session. But I think one of the things that's really fascinating about your journey as well is that you have been through various university systems. But I think when you're a PhD student, you don't necessarily imagine all the different ways in which you can bring this kind of work into your research. And I've always been very passionate about how research communication isn't just a kind of destination. It isn't the result of, it isn't what you do when you've got your results and your findings and you share it with the public. It's such an integral part of the research process itself. And I think certainly by embracing that idea that we're not just the best people to create the questions that lead to the research, we in fact need to broaden that pool of people that are involved with research. And that's where we see the rise of methodologies like citizen science, which grow out of the research that has shown us that involving the public, engaging the public, being part of that social world in which our research is located, found, applied, is a critical way of both understanding key priorities for society, but also it's a way for us to make sure that we're engaging with people about the things we're doing. I mean, it's fascinating to see some of the discussions over the last few weeks about ChatGPT, this AI software that's allowing people to do everything from write films and scripts for a whole range of things to creating code for in remarkable solutions. And I feel like the kind of world's kind of blown up around this platform, in part because it sort of signals a shift in how we think about knowledge and its function and its value, and also what sorts of things we learn. So I think a kind of key part of doing research communication is understanding how the things that we do are changing society. And I think that's why I think festivals are such wonderful places in which you can develop these opportunities, because it allows people to step inside these worlds without it feeling too much like work. And that's a big, I think, component of getting this right.
Absolutely. So, Andy, we're really delighted here at Edinburgh Napier University to be hosting this event on behalf of the Scottish Graduate School for Arts and Humanities, and to be welcoming you to facilitate this session. So the Scottish Graduate School for Arts and Humanities, is the world's first national graduate school in the arts and humanities that works together to inspire researchers and doctoral students to become caring, ethical, and reflective practitioners with a real demonstrable commitment towards creating social value in the range of disciplines represented in the arts and humanities. Andy, I was wondering if we can sort of take ourselves forward to 1 month time when we have this event at Edinburgh. What sort of things will our participants be doing on the day when they arrive to our beautiful campus out at the Craiglockhart campus in Edinburgh?
Well, absolutely anything you can imagine, Gary. I'm very passionate about the idea that there isn't one way to communicate your research. So we know there are people that would like to be the next Brian Cox or whoever it might be, a presenter, but actually there's so many roles in different manners in which you can communicate your research that I'm really keen that people find their own way into it. And there are lots of different routes into research communication. So we'll talk about some of the different opportunities. I mean, there's some random things that you get asked to do as a researcher. When you establish your public presence as a researcher, you can get involved with all sorts of crazy things. I've consulted on scripts for TV and film and for documentaries. I've also produced theatre plays with people. And of course, a big part of that is having the public identity that people can discover. So we sort of will start with thinking about how you cultivate your own public profile, and think about that particularly as a kind of professional developmental journey. I still have my website, which I built for the first time back in 1999, I think, which for me has been, 20-year journey of feeling that sense of ownership of my own sort of research process. But I think I often sort of reflect on why I have social media assets, and it's for me a really important part of having continuity across your career. It's a kind of way of telling your story to yourself, if nothing else, about what you're doing and piecing everything together. And so one of the things I really want to cover in the day at the starting point is really to think about those different platforms that can be a place for you to share and to begin connecting with others. And I think that's another really key part of this, is that sharing is connecting with other people in your research, people that are close to your research but outside of your discipline. So there's a really expansive way in which we can think about research communication, which begins with breaking down the different types of audiences, publics, or people that you want to connect with. And I think that's really important, because actually it starts with those kind of key reasons, I think, from a personal perspective as to why you would do this. The classic thing is that people don't find their time to do these sorts of things. But what I really want to get across is how making time for this is actually a way for you to level up your own skills as a researcher, but also to fulfill those kind of obligations, expectations that the public have of us. And I think that's another key part of this, that in fact, to not be publicly present, to not be sharing what we do, is a real problem. And so we'll start by talking about some of these platforms that we're using. I think a nice, easy one to jump into is LinkedIn. LinkedIn, because a lot of people already have LinkedIn and maybe know it, but perhaps don't get the most out of it. But it's also a nice platform to cross the divide between a kind of research community or business community, whatever is your professional network, and also that public profile as well. And so it also is a way for you to kind of build your database of contacts over time. So I think having a sense of that as a starting point is really important. But we'll certainly look through and explore a whole range of different approaches to communicating research. We'll talk about how to make your own podcast. We can get people making their first podcast episode in about 20 minutes. So we'll see what people are keen to do. And each of these things, you can dive a lot deeper into them and really explore a whole range of possibilities. But the day will focus particularly on developing those skills to make content creation a really seamless process and a bigger part of your life. I often use content creation as a process of discovery. So getting people set up to a point where they can do that easily, where they can feel like it's enriching their lives as a researcher, but also, and crucially, where they can see it as a point of departure for discovering other people, but also re-engaging critically with what they're doing as researchers, which is another kind of big part of it.
Great. That sounds amazing. And you spoke about the real value there of content creation. We know from the VTI Researcher Development Framework that dissemination and communication of research is part and parcel of the role of a researcher. Do you see that being a PhD student is a great opportunity to engage in content creation in order to enhance, not only their research skills and becoming a rounded researcher, but do you think content creation can become part of the research process itself?
I do think it can. I also think one of the major motivations for me is that we desperately need researchers to do this. We live in incredibly challenging times, particularly around how information reaches people. And we just need more researchers out there sharing what they do to challenge this kind of tidal wave of misinformation that often comes to us through social platforms. So I think the challenge has become both greater, but the opportunity is also, I think, even more exciting now, where you can have a whole range of kind of approaches to doing this. And so I want to show you one thing, actually, whilst we're in the stream. I'm going to drop this into the stream. So as I mentioned earlier, I have had a website for 20 years. And over the last sort of 6 months or so, I've been thinking about how we sort of evolve our approach to communication and how we sort of rethink the way in which we do this. So I've built a metaverse world, which is a kind of evolution of my website. You can jump into this space and you can discover different aspects of my work. And what's fun about it is you can actually wear a virtual reality headset and start to explore this environment. You can see the different areas of research that I work on and let's head over to the metaverse. So there are a whole range of creative tools that, again, researchers can use to start telling their story about their work that go well beyond the kind of current platforms that exist now, and give that opportunity through creating something distinct, through creating something novel, a chance to also rethink what you're doing as a researcher too. So for me, these platforms are a kind of discovery process and a way of you re-engaging with what you're doing as a researcher. There's a real kind of criticality for me that's connected to this process. For me, I remember another professor telling me when I was, earlier in my career and sort of thinking about how we begin to communicate our research, that if you're not prepared to say it on television, then you're not terribly confident with what you've done. And I think that's a really useful way of thinking about the value of this, because when you do get into and we do this still in universities, where a common thing to have is the opportunity to get some media training, conventional media training, so that when your findings come out, when your papers come out, you get a chance to be interviewed by the media. You're able to do that. I think what's wonderful today is that through using mobile confidence, so that when you do become of great interest to the media, you feel actually able to deal with that. And I know many people that really never make that leap, actually, and that's a real challenge, because the sort of hurdle of being on camera in public is so great that it makes it really difficult for them to do something like that. So over the day, we'll also talk about how you can grow your confidence using content creation, and confidence both in terms of making videos and being able to write for public audiences is one element of that. But I think another key thing is making sure that you have the space in your life to actually give time to this. And that's hopefully what this will give people.
Great. Wow, that sounds amazing. And thanks so much for showing us the metaverse there. It's kind of blown away by what you demonstrated there. Obviously, that looks, for some people, myself included, quite complicated. How difficult is it to kind of set up your own metaverse or to join the metaverse, or to showcase your own research and to interact with, other researchers out there?
Well, I'm always sort of conscious of saying these things are incredibly easy. I think they're so much more simple than they were a few years ago. I mean, this environment that I've just shown you, it's mostly a drag and drop environment where you can upload your content, drag it into the space, and start to curate your own environments. There are, of course, always additional levels of complexity with all of these platforms, whether you're making content for TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, whatever it is. There's a deeper dive you can take with each of the platforms to get more out of it. One of the things that's always been really important for me is to not worry too much about audience, and worry about whether in fact making that content has been productive, like how many views does it get and what sort of impact does it have, because it's always been for me a very reflective process. So I think if you grow your audience, that's great and wonderful to see happening, but actually the key value of it is being able to have that process for yourself as a researcher, trying to piece things together. So all the platforms we'll use on the training day will be things that you can get up and running within 20 minutes of logging in and creating your account. And that's true of this metaverse world that I've just shown. It's true of TikTok. It's true of YouTube. There's always greater complexity. And I think one of the things that's really always interested me is how you can level up your skills within these environments. So much of it can be done from a mobile device now. I mean, what's been incredible over the last 2 or 3 years even is that a lot of the high-end editing functionality of what was previously expensive desktop-based software is now possible to do on mobile phones. So, rather than take your commuter train home after a day at the office, scrolling through stuff on Facebook, you can actually spend some time making something yourself that you can put out. And that, again, for me, is such an important part of it as well, because I'm very conscious that one of the challenges of content creation with research is that actually, we're so immersed in digital media that for some people, the last thing they want to do is actually do more of it. But if you can flip the time that you spend scrolling through content into time that you can spend making content, I think that both has a greater impact in terms of your own health and wellness and feeling of kind of productivity, but also it gives you that chance to understand actually the public. And this is another big part of this puzzle, is I used to, in my science communication lectures, I used to ask undergraduates, when's the last time you bought a newspaper? But I've stopped doing that for the last 2 years because nobody buys any newspapers anymore. So we live in times of remarkable behavioral change in terms of how people access information, content, and there are so many steps we can take into this that I think the first step is understanding that they're happening. I mean, I use a platform called Discord quite a bit for a number of things, but most of my colleagues and I think most people still don't even know what Discord is and don't appreciate what's happening around that platform. So I think a big part of it is awareness raising of how communication and behavior change around content is changing. And that for me, again, is a lifetime exercise. And it's so important because, as I mentioned, my website, which I've had for 20 years, it's gone through different iterations. It's always been quite dynamic and changing with the sort of times. But I'm also aware that most of us don't browse websites much anymore. And in fact, websites aren't really terribly well built for mobile browsing. So you have to sort of think about where you can engage people with what you're doing. And I always say to people, your LinkedIn account can be your website. There's so much integration with that platform now. You can publish articles, you can share presentations, you can host live events. There's so much you can do with a lot of the platforms for free, which I think if people get their heads around, they can start to begin to make that kind of impact. And another kind of key part of it is, and why it's so important to start now, is that the biggest loss of not doing this is that accumulative loss over time, where if you don't have that portfolio of outputs in the public sphere, not only is it harder to do it effectively and to keep growing your skill set in that area, but it's also difficult for people to see what you've done. So I always tell people, think about what they're going to find, because actually, most people aren't discovering your academic articles. Most of your academic articles are still behind paywalls. And that's obviously a problem we're trying to fix in universities, but it's still a reality. And we're also not often terribly well resourced and supported in terms of getting kind of press out of the things we do. So a lot of it has to be done by yourself. And I think the best way to achieve that is to look at it as part of your research process. And if you approach it that way, then so many opportunities come to me through Twitter or LinkedIn or not email. And that's another key thing, is that actually these platforms are a way for people to discover you and bring opportunities in your direction. It's a way for you to connect with and actually look beyond your immediate world and see what else is happening out there. Because I think one of the challenges you have as a researcher, as a PhD researcher, is you can get so focused on what's in front of you, with only the very few opportunities that we sort of send PhD researchers out to, like conferences. But there's so much more that's out there. They're not just kind of competition for what you're doing, but actually people that can help you do it. And I think that's another key part of this, is an appreciation for the fact that being within these networks is a way for you to be a better and more effective researcher.
Absolutely. I think, I'm really excited about this event that we've got coming up in April. And I think you've really highlighted the importance and the value of having skills in content creation across a range of platforms. And I think, quite a lot of the skills developed next month in April, will be really useful for those doctoral students who come along, who pursue careers outside of academia, because I think, it will be so valuable outside of the academy. So I think, this session on, sharing your research for content creation, can be really wide, and it'll be really valuable for those doctoral students who've, perhaps already made up their mind that, they're going to go off and work in the creative economies themselves, rather than study inside a university or pursue a career there. So yeah, I can definitely see lots of links being made amongst everything that you've said there, Andy.
And I think we've already got a problem, Gary. We, as we mentioned earlier, the event's already sold out. So we now need to do something to actually engage more people. Maybe need to run more of these. But I think one of the things we're quite keen to do is hear from people with, especially those that are connected to the grad school, to see if they'd like to set up a content creators group. We know that there will be some people that are disappointed not to be able to book into this session, but we can certainly mobilize people. And again, I think that's a crucial part of this process. We need people in the arts and humanities to be doing more of this kind of work. So if we can get people following the Twitter account, perhaps there's a way for them to sort of build a connection with us. We can then share some more information about how we set up a network of research students that are keen to discuss, share best practice, share how to do stuff apart from anything, and understand how platforms can be used to really empower researchers and give them their voice.
Absolutely. So yeah, for those of you watching, please do give us a follow on Twitter. The link is on the screen. And yeah, as Andy says, if there is an appetite for a content creators group, then we'll be more than happy to facilitate that and to share the discussions which happen at the event. So Andy, thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to having you in Edinburgh for our event for the Creative Economies Knowledge Exchange Hub. The event takes place on the 21st of April. The start time is 10 a.m. We should be finished around 3:30 p.m. Lunch will be provided by the university. And if you've got any accessibility requirements, any dietary requirements, or you require some free car parking, just drop me an email for those of you who have signed up. But Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great to hear from you and to hear about your vision and the plans for the day that we have in April next month.
Thanks so much, Gary. And again, for those of you that aren't able to come to the session in April, we're really keen to make sure you have opportunities to recount, and we'll share details about how to connect with each other going forward. But yeah, thanks again, Gary. It's wonderful to be with you, and look forward to being in Edinburgh next month.
Great. Thank you. We'll see you then. Take care.
Bye. Bye.